Okay, today we're going to begin with the basics. Breathing will make your swimming so much easier. So we're going to talk a little bit about breathing, and there's 4 main things that can cause you to be breathless in the water. Number 1 is kicking too much. If you kick too much, you use the bigger muscle groups, it's going to suck all your oxygen and increase your heart rate. So that's going to cause breathlessness. Number 2 has to do with body balance. So if your legs are sinking and dropping to the bottom of the pool and they're not upright on the surface, you're carrying more of your body weight, so that's going to increase your heart rate and cause breathlessness. Number 3 also has to do with body balance. So when you're turning to breathe, if your hand is dropping as your face is out of the water to inhale, it's going to pull you under and you're not going to get a good breath. And the 4th and most probably common thing that causes breathlessness is the timing of your exhale and inhale. So a lot of people, when they take a breath, they take a big breath and then they put their face back under and they blow it all out right away. So then they don't leave any air in their lungs. So when they come up to breathe, they're like kind of gasping. So what you really want to do is you want to turn your on your hip. You want to take an inhale. And then as you turn your face back down, you're going to, for the most part, hold the air in your lungs. This is key to breathing. You're going to forcefully exhale before you inhale. So I got the air in my lungs and then I'm holding my breath. And so the timing of when you exhale to inhale is absolutely so critical when it comes to not getting breathlessness in the water. Okay, now we're going to talk about body balance. Once you figure out the breathing technique that you want to use, you want to think about your body position in the water. You may have read that a lot of swimmers tend to swim downhill, which means their weight of their body's on their sternum with their chin tucked. That's the goal that you're trying to achieve for body balance. Now, it takes more than just pressing on your sternum and tucking your chin to get that downhill swimming effect. Part of it has to do with the way you kick. You want to make sure you're kicking from your quads and hip flexors, and the way you enter with your hand. If you're someone who likes to do a lot of reaching and flattening, sometimes that shallow reach tends to drop your body. So when you're trying to enter and focus on the top, that's going to in turn put the weight of your body on your chest and sternum. Also with the kick, which we'll go into a little bit more in the next video, you just want to make sure you're using the right muscle groups for the kick to achieve that downhill body position and not let your legs sink. There's a couple things you can use, some tools that you can use. Number 1 is a pull buoy. It's usually a blue and white flotation device that you put up between your thighs, and that it's going to help you achieve body balance. At first it may throw you off, but don't resist it. Allow it to get your legs up. Another tool you can use, they're called core shorts, and again, that'll bring your body position up. Okay, so now we're going to tie in rotation. You've probably seen swimmers rotate from left hip to right hip. We're going to tie that all in with how it affects your breathing, how it affects your kick, and how it affects your body balance. So when you swim, you're either on your right hip or your left hip. The easiest way to think about rotation is when your left arm enters, you go on your left hip. When your right arm enters, you go on your right hip. What's really going on, and we'll talk about this in the next video, is how much the underwater pull drives that rotation. But for breathing purposes, when you breathe, it's not just a matter of turning your head. It's a matter of turning on your hip to breathe, and in turn, you get a little bit extra rotation with that arm, and you're on your hip, so your face should clear the water. If you don't rotate, you're going to have a harder time clearing your face out of the water, and you're probably going to lift your head. If you lift your head, your legs are going to go down, and that's how it affects body balance. So even though you're not breathing, you still want to be rotating from hip to hip. And the only time in your stroke that you ever stop that rotation is just when you breathe. All right, next we're going to talk about kick. If you're a triathlete trying to get to be a faster swimmer, you really don't want to use your kick much. You want to save your kick for the bike and the run. If you over kick, it's going to cause you to be breathlessness. So the key to kicking is to kick just enough from the right muscle group, the quads and the hip flexors, to keep your legs float, to keep that balance, not necessarily for propulsive purposes. So having flexible ankles in the water is helpful with kick. Generally, you want to think about a straight leg. You don't want to be kicking too much from the knee down, and you want those toes slightly pointed and not flexed. If you flex your feet, you're kicking from the knee down, and that you're not going to go anywhere. If you're using the right muscles, quads and hip flexors with some ankle flexibility, it's going to provide just enough motion so your legs don't sink and they come up, and you achieve that downhill body balance. Now that you've worked on your breathing, body balance, and rotation, it's time to work on the 3 main phases of the swim stroke. The first phase we're going to talk about is what's called high elbow recovery. What that means is high elbow means your elbow is above your wrist, above your fingertips. As your stroke is coming around and you're rotating, you're leading the stroke with your elbow and always keeping those fingertips below the elbow, below the wrist. And you want to keep your arm tight, close to your body as you're doing it, because it takes less time to bring your arm around for the recovery phase if you're nice and tight than if you're wide. A lot of times people who have wide arms tend to have a very flat hand entry, which the reason recovery is so important is how your arm is in the recovery phase, whether it's wide or tight and narrow like it should be, that affects your hand entry, which is what we're going to talk about in the next video. So next we're going to talk about phase 2, which is actually my favorite part of the freestyle stroke, because phase 2 is hand entry. Once you work on that, you get that nice tight high elbow recovery, your rotation's good. How does your hand enter? Always keep your fingertips below your wrist, below your elbow. So because you've already worked on the high elbow recovery, that's going to set you up for hand entry. When you enter, you want to enter with those fingertips first, and you want to rotate. If you don't have rotation, this is what it looks like. You start to reach and grab. When you start to reach and grab, you start to enter really flat, and a lot of times you don't even know it, but you're putting your fingertips up like you're stopping yourself, and that's creating resistance, and that's creating what's called a dropped elbow pull, which we'll talk about that next. Okay, next we're going to talk about the third and final phase of the freestyle stroke, which is called the underwater pull. The underwater pull is comprised of 2 components. One is called the catch, and then the push. The catch always precedes the push, which makes up the pull. The recovery and the hand entry have an effect on how you're going to pull. Just like a high elbow recovery, you want to have a high elbow catch. Doesn't mean your elbow's on the surface of the water, it means your elbow is above your fingertips, which are below your wrist. So you want to catch and then you want to push. One thing I commonly see is that shallower entry, which causes that dropped elbow, and then you initiate your pull with your elbow, and you really don't go very far if you're trying to pull with your elbow. So that hand, and again, the hand entry and that hip rotation is so important to get your hand deep so you can maximize the power phase, which is from the here to here, and that's going to provide that forward propulsion. Here to here is going to drive you forward. You don't really get any propulsion from here to here. It's all pretty deep and it's all underneath your body, and you're going to push all the way past your hip. The reason the catch and the pull is so important is that's what drives the hip rotation. We started with hip rotation. You have to know about hip rotation, but now you're really ready to really drive that hip rotation with your catch and then your pull. That kind of was really where we're going with working on the recovery and the hand entry, is to get the most, maximize our catch and pull, to pull the greatest amount of water with every arm stroke to make you go faster.